Hey, you think you can mess with my sister and get away with it? You better make this right. One day, I found an incredibly beautiful high school girl who seemed weak in the park. I took her to the hospital. And when she said she had no place to go, I decided to take care of her at my place. However, not long after, a black luxury car pulled up in front of my apartment, and the intercom was pressed repeatedly. Terrified, I cautiously opened the door to find a tough-looking man, who clearly had connections to the underworld, standing there. "I want the girl back," he demanded, his veins bulging on his forehead. Without much choice, I was taken to a mansion. "My name is Alex. I've always loved books, and that's the sole reason I became a librarian. Honestly, it doesn't pay much, but I find immense joy in being surrounded by the books I love every day." One morning on a day off, a high school girl in uniform wandered into the library. Her strikingly beautiful features and long, sleek black hair caught my eye, and I couldn't help but stare at her. Watching her read was like a scene from a movie. While organizing the shelves, I kept glancing at her and even misplaced books several times. She spent the entire day reading until closing time. The next day, I resolved to do better, reflecting on my mistakes from the day before. "I messed up a lot yesterday. It's Monday, so she shouldn't be here today, and I need to stay focused." But to my surprise, she showed up again shortly after the library opened. She's in her uniform. Maybe there's a temporary school closure? She stayed until closing time again. And the same thing happened the next day, and the day after that. She spent the whole day at the library for 5 consecutive days. By then, my colleagues started murmuring, "She's here every day. What's going on with her school?" It's October, a time with no major holidays. Her continuous presence at the library seemed unusual, suggesting she had some reason to be there. Curious, I finally decided to talk to her. "Hey, you're in high school, right? Are you a student at Siren High?" She looked scared, quickly stood up, and ran out. I chased after her, but she was too fast, and I lost sight of her. After that day, she never returned to the library. I couldn't help but wonder how she was doing. There was nothing I could do since I didn't know her name or how to contact her. I could only hope she was safe. 3 days later, while heading home from work, I took a detour due to road construction. I saw a girl in uniform sitting on a bench in the park. "That's the high school girl." I rushed over and said, "Hey, you're the girl from the other day, right?" Startled, she covered her face with her hands and said, "No, don't look at me." Her hair was a bit disheveled, and her uniform seemed a little dirty. Worried, I asked, "What's your name?" She hesitantly replied that her name was Emily. "Have you been sleeping here? What about your parents?" Clinging to my arm, she begged me for help. "Please, don't contact my parents or the school." Emily's face was very pale, and I became even more worried. Even though October has had many warm days lately, it could get cold at any time. Moreover, a high school girl sleeping in the park in her uniform is obviously very dangerous. But if I lecture her now, she'll probably just run away from me again. So, I nodded silently and decided to listen to her story. "All right, I understand. Just calm down." Relieved, Emily let go of my arm but immediately collapsed on the bench, unconscious. "Emily, are you okay?" I shook her and called her name repeatedly. But she didn't respond. Panicking, I called an ambulance. The ambulance arrived shortly after. When the paramedics asked about my relationship with Emily, I hesitated for a moment. Emily seemed to have reasons for not wanting her parents or school to be contacted. But if I said I was a stranger, they might investigate and contact her family anyway. So, after a brief hesitation, I lied and said I was her brother and accompanied her to the hospital. Fortunately, Emily wasn't seriously ill. According to Dr. Smith, she hadn't eaten anything for 3 days, which caused dizziness and anemia. I told Dr. Smith that my sister had been dieting recently to avoid suspicion. Since I couldn't just leave her, I stayed by her side until she recovered. After a night of intravenous fluids, she was feeling much better and thanked me profusely. "I'm sorry for all the trouble. Thank you for not telling the hospital staff the truth and for covering the costs. I'll definitely pay you back. Don't worry about the money. But what are you going to do now?" Are you planning to sleep in the park again? When I asked out of concern, she looked down and fell silent. I sighed deeply. Is going back to your family still not an option? No. I see. How about staying at my place for now? What? Realizing how that sounded, I quickly added. Oh, I mean, it's not like that. I just can't let you sleep in the park again. Emily laughed softly at my flustered explanation. I understand. I'll take you up on your offer, then. She nodded and smiled. We went back to my place, where I let her take a shower while I cooked a simple meal. It was just some vegetables and meat stir-fried together, but Emily seemed very happy and ate with gusto. That was delicious. It's been a while since I've had a warm meal. I'll cook tomorrow to thank you. Can you cook? I'm looking forward to it then. Well, don't expect anything fancy, she said with a shy smile. Since she would be staying for a while, I bought her some basic necessities, though she insisted on wearing my clothes instead of new ones. I feel bad about you buying clothes for me, she said, wearing my oversized shirts, which made my heart race a little. Living with Emily brought unexpected joy to my previously dull life. Every morning, she greeted me with a bright smile. Good morning. We'd have breakfast together, and she'd send me off to work with a have a good day. And when I came home, she'd welcome me with a welcome back. We'd watch TV and chat in the evenings, and while we didn't share the same bed, we slept in adjacent rooms. These everyday moments became so much more enjoyable with her around. Wait, have I always smiled this much? As someone who had always been engrossed in books, I used to have a rather stoic expression. But lately, I found myself smiling all the time. I even caught myself humming while working or walking home, which was surprising even to me. My co-workers seemed to notice the change in me, often teasing, "Did something good happen? Alex, you look so happy lately. Did you get a girlfriend?" During this time, I realized something important. I love her. I want to be with her forever. But right now, I'm acting as her guardian. And she's still in high school. With everything considered, I couldn't bring myself to confess my feelings. One day, perhaps tired of waiting, Emily crossed her arms and asked me, "So, what do you think of me?" Well, As I hesitated, Emily pouted and said, "Come on, be clear." Fine, I'll say it first. I think I've fallen for you, Alex. What? Her unexpected confession filled me with joy and excitement. Thank you. I like you too, Emily. She smiled happily. So, you'll stay with me, right? I'll quit school and find a job. However, her words brought me back to reality. I want to be with you too, but what about your parents? You're still a minor. We can't keep this a secret forever. She shook her head, no need. It's my life. But I held her hands and looked straight into her eyes. I don't know why you left home, and you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But we can't keep living like this. No matter the reason. People won't understand a high school student living with a stranger. Your parents might be worried sick. At least let them know where you are. However, she still shouted firmly, no, and stopped me. Absolutely not. If we contact them, you will get hurt. I'll get hurt? I was momentarily scared, but I realized it would be worse if something happened later. It's okay. I'll apologize with you. Don't worry about me. After much persuasion, Emily reluctantly agreed to call her father. I'll come home tomorrow, and I'll bring the person I'm with. Hearing the loud commotion on the other end of the line made me very nervous. But I knew this was necessary for our future together, so I braced myself. The next morning, exactly 1 week after taking Emily in, a black luxury car pulled up in front of my apartment, and the intercom buzzed loudly. Terrified, I opened the door to find a tough-looking man, who immediately threatened me. Hey, give us the girl. As I froze, Emily came out behind me and yelled. Timothy, what are you doing here? Seeing her in my oversized sweatshirt, Timothy's face turned pale, and he grabbed my collar. What have you done to her? You'd better be ready to take responsibility. He clearly misunderstood our relationship. Emily quickly stepped in to stop him. Stop, Timothy. He's the one who helped me. She glared at him and demanded, "Anyway, how did you know I was here?" Then, Timothy, who had seemed so confident just a moment ago, suddenly became quiet and started to stammer. Emily sighed and said, "That must be Dad's doing." "All right, I'll handle it." She went back inside to change into her uniform, then returned. Still confused, I asked her cautiously, "Is your father?" Emily nodded, understanding my question immediately. "Yes, he's a gang boss." "That's why I didn't want to tell you." I replied with a strained face, "Yeah, I figured." But Emily pressed me, "You'll come with me to apologize, right?" I took a deep breath and nodded. Since I had taken her in, I knew this moment might come. I changed into my best suit, got into the waiting car, and headed to her family home with Emily. Her father greeted us, nearly in tears, and hugged her tightly. "Emily, I was so worried when you disappeared. I thought you were kidnapped." I was stunned by his unexpected doting nature. Noticing my surprise, her father turned to me with a sharp gaze. "I heard you were living with my daughter. You must have had some serious intentions to do that, right?" He pressed closer to me. The difference between his expressions for his daughter and me was so stark that I broke into a cold sweat from fear and anxiety. Emily, however, puffed her cheeks and raised her voice. "This is exactly why I hate you, Dad. How many times are you going to ruin my relationships?" Later, I learned that Emily's father would intimidate any boy who got close to her by saying, "You better be serious about my daughter," scaring them all away. Her father, unfazed, responded seriously, "Of course. I can't entrust my precious daughter to anyone who isn't ready to make her happy for life." But Emily wasn't backing down. "That doesn't mean you can just arrange a marriage with someone I've never met. I'm not a tool for expanding your influence." It turned out her father was trying to set her up with the son of another gang leader. Her father, with a grim expression, replied, "Ordinary people can't understand our world. All the boys who were close to you left, didn't they? It's best for you to be with someone who shares our life." Hearing those words, Emily looked down and bit her lip, trying to hold back her tears. Watching this exchange silently, I suddenly felt a surge of anger. Forgetting the fear I had felt earlier, I shouted angrily at her father, "Are you even a father? Children aren't property. She nearly died from dehydration and starvation after spending 3 days in the park. Why can't you see how serious she is? Sleeping in the park? For 3 days?" Her father's face turned pale, and he spoke in a trembling voice to Emily. "Emily, why didn't you call?" Emily looked him straight in the eyes and replied, "I wanted you to see how serious I am. I choose my own happiness. I won't marry someone you chose for me." I was impressed by her courage but was floored by her next words. "I'm going to marry him," she said, pointing at me. "What?" I blurted out involuntarily. Timothy, who had been silently listening beside us until now, glared at me intensely and said, "I knew it." I hastily responded, No, I didn't do anything. She's still a minor." But Timothy's expression remained suspicious. Meanwhile, her father said, "That's good to hear. I'll compensate you for hosting my daughter for a week, but I want you to stop seeing her." He took a wad of cash from his wallet and tried to hand it to me. However, I shook my head and declined. I don't need such things. But now that I know the situation, I can't just stand by and do nothing. If you intend to keep binding her, I can't let her go back to this house. I will make her happy," I declared firmly. Emily looked at me with tearful eyes and said, "Alex." Seeing this, her father laughed and said to me, "Okay. You've got guts. If you're prepared to take responsibility for Emily's life, then take her with you. I'll leave my daughter in your hands." Her father delivered the ultimatum to Emily. "If you really want to be with him, go ahead. But our family ties will be severed. You will never be allowed to return." Timothy, listening nearby, quickly intervened. "Boss, you don't have to go that far." But her father silenced him with, "She'll be happier living a normal life." Emily and I bowed our heads in gratitude. "Thank you. But please, at least attend our wedding as her father." She deserves to have you there on her big day." Her father, looking somewhat softened, replied, "Fine. I promise to be her father until I see her in her wedding dress," and instructed Timothy to bring the car around. Emily looked a bit reluctant, but her father turned his back quickly and said, "I'm not seeing you off. Go now," before heading back inside the house. I noticed the sadness in her father's expression for a moment, feeling a twinge of guilt, but I got into the car. Timothy drove us back to the apartment and gave me a stern warning again. "Remember, no touching her before the wedding. Got it?" "I understand. I promise." I made Emily promise to finish high school, and I continued to act as her guardian until then. During that time, I introduced her to my parents and informed them about our engagement. Although they were shocked that my fiancée was a high school girl and a gang's daughter, they accepted our determination to support and love each other, and gave us their blessing. Finally, the day of Emily's high school graduation arrived. Right after the ceremony, we moved to a small church on the outskirts of town to hold a modest wedding with only close family present. As promised, Emily's father attended the wedding, walking her down the aisle and handing her over to me. "This is goodbye. Take care," he said before leaving the church. We hurried after him, but he got into his black car and drove away. After that, we lost contact with him, and his former home was eventually cleared. Later, we learned that he had dissolved the gang group he had inherited, as the organization was collapsing. He had left to start a new life somewhere else. Emily sometimes remembered her father and cried, but she would smile bravely and say, "We shouldn't interfere with his decision. I'm going to be a mother soon." A few years into our marriage, we were expecting a child. As I gently patted Emily's belly, I murmured, "When our child is born, let's hire a detective to find your father. Even a stubborn man like him would want to see his grandchild. You really are brave," Emily said with a slight smile, placing her hand over mine. "But I'm glad I chose to be with you." Meanwhile, I continued working as a librarian. Not long after our child was born, while I was continuing my usual work as a librarian, an unexpected person walked into the library. And I was stunned. It was Emily's father who had entered. He sat down and started reading a book with a serious expression. Seeing the book's title, I understood his situation. When he tried to leave at closing time, I ran after him and called out, "Sir, it's you, isn't it?" He turned around, startled, and tried to escape. "Please, don't run away like your daughter did," I said, grabbing his wrist. He stopped, resigned. "My shift is over. Why don't you come see Emily? We had a son recently." His eyes flickered with emotion, but he said, "No, I'm too busy." "Aren't you free? But right now, you're unemployed, aren't you?" I said, pointing to the book in his hand. It was a job-hunting book, and today was a weekday. It was easy to tell that he was currently unemployed. Then he asked, "Please don't tell Emily." He has tried to find a new job since then, but his gang background and age have made it difficult for him. I don't want Emily to know about this pathetic situation. With a pained expression, her father spoke, and I responded, "With all due respect, I think you're much better now than you were before, like more human. You were really scary back then." Angrily, he retorted, "What did you say?" But I smiled and continued, "Emily wants to see you. She'll accept you as you are now." Reluctantly, he agreed to come home with me. When we arrived, Emily was genuinely shocked. She immediately teared up and hugged her father. "Dad, where have you been all this time?" Her father, too, teared up as he embraced his daughter. After that, we all started living together. He helped with housework and taking care of his grandchild while continuing his job search. I helped him with his resume and interview practice, though I found myself constantly critiquing him. "Your handwriting is too messy on this resume. You don't need to write perfectly, but at least make it legible. During the interview, you need to smile more warmly. Not with that scary smile. Your voice is too intimidating. Try speaking more gently." I realized why he had struggled to find a job, because his resume and interview demeanor were problematic. Thanks to my advice, he eventually secured a job at a company. Unlike before, he now spends his days following instructions from his superiors, but he finds the work enjoyable. It's so fulfilling to do work that helps others," he said one evening after returning from work. Emily smiled warmly and said, "I'm glad you've finally become a decent person, Dad. Now you can proudly be my child's grandfather."